Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the library tour of Doom, a generational ordeal inflicted upon you by Lord Ganesha and myself, in which we go through every book in my library. A library tour like unto no other library tour, not shelf by shelf, not bookcase by bookcase, not subject by subject, but book by book. And not just the books on my shelves, but the books that have ever been on my shelves, or ever will be on my shelves. Today, we're going back to the year 1964. To a work of military history, a slim work of military history. This is Bruce Bliven's book, Battle for Manhattan. And this is all about George Washington and his army on the island of Manhattan, facing the full might of the British invasion force and realizing that they had no chance, no chance at all to survive, much less to hold the territory. So they had to retreat, a long retreat down the island. With the British right on their heels the whole time. And Bliven does a great job, fantastic job throughout here. Throughout the book, he gives you, let me show you, he gives you maps that show Manhattan in Washington's day superimposed with Manhattan of 1964. So that you know the terrain, exactly where things were happening, even though most of it doesn't resemble anything like what it did then. And this is a pivotal part in the very earliest year of the American Revolution, because Washington's army was effectively the only real army. And if it had been destroyed, it was bottled on an island. If it had been destroyed, then the revolution would effectively have been over. It would have sputtered on for a while in some pockets here and there, but there would have been no hope. And to his credit, Washington knew that, and military historians have ascribed a great deal of credit to his retreat. Those of you who have read military history, or God forbid, been in the military, will know it takes a great deal of skill to do a retreat well. It's in many ways much harder than to do an attack well. And say what I might about Washington, he knew how to retreat. he had crazy ideas the whole time, ideas out of which he had to be wrestled by his subordinates. The whole time that he was retreating, he kept dreaming about turning his men, deploying them, and engaging in a stand-up Napoleon-era style slugfest with the advancing British army. That would certainly have meant the annihilation of his own forces, and he ought to have been able to see that the way his subordinates did. But nevertheless, he never actually did fully do that. So instead, we get tension, a very tense story, and Bliven writes it perfectly. Let me give you a little example here of his tone, in case you can ever find a copy of this book so that you'll know what you're getting. Even though the British preparations had moved slowly, Washington's defense was anything but ready. He had several of his strongest units, including Smallwood's Marylanders and Knowlton's Rangers, in positions at the Harlem section of the East River shoreline, ready to meet the British assault boats. But his force as a whole was shockingly vulnerable. It was scattered about the island in such a way that perhaps half its potential power was unusable. The army was off balance, and it needed at least another day or two before it could be pulled together, time it was not going to be allowed. The main trouble was that Washington was still in the midst of shifting his troops. Although the British certainly did not realize what was going on, he was in the process of surrendering the prize, the city of New York, that Howe intended to seize by force. If Howe's methodical mounting of his assault had taken perhaps 48 hours longer, New York would have been his just for the occupying. Washington's men were getting out of it as fast as they could, evacuating their stores of supplies and their sick and wounded. Their fastest had been painfully slow, for the army was short of wagons as well as horses. And Bliven keeps his eye on every single moving part of this story all throughout. The ordnance, the topography, first of all, which takes a lot of research to get right, and also the personalities. Not only Howe, but all the other generals, and Washington, who it was infamously during this retreat down the island of Manhattan that he, for the first time in the sight of American troops, lost his temper. Washington had a monumental volcanic temper that he worked his whole life to keep under control. And during this retreat, he lost his temper. And when Washington lost his temper, he effectively lost his mind. He would just thrash around in all directions, weaving a cloud of obscenity, the like of which no one had ever heard, and also thrashing out in all directions. According to a couple of eyewitnesses in this particular situation. He was lashing out with his horse crop at not only men, but officers. Totally unheard of. Totally unheard of. And Bliven is also really good on the importance of this battle in American mytho-history. Even though it was a retreat, it did a lot to buck up the American spirit. And all of that is caught in a book of a surprising brevity. So in terms of a military study of the American Revolution, this one is really good. I don't think there's ever been a better study of the Battle for Manhattan. So your book in the Library Tour of Doom today is, of course, a recommend. I have never seen another copy of this old, this is an old Pelican paperback. I've never seen another copy of this. I've certainly never seen it in hardcover with a dust jacket. That would be awesome, because this thing creaks when I open it. But I'll take care of it as long as I can, because it's well worth revisiting. And that's it. That's your library tour for today. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? Probably a completely different subject in a completely different area. I'm not planning these so that you have no way to know when the hammer blow will fall. I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.